Hi guys, for criminology this week, we are going to talk about political crime and terrorism. So, political crime, by definition, are just illegal acts designed to undermine an existing government and threaten its survival. When something is considered to be a political crime, that can be pretty subjective. In some countries, a political crime could be speaking out against the leader of the country or writing a newspaper article that's critical of the regime. And could be what other people consider freedom fighters or revolutionaries. Some people could say George Washington might have committed political crimes, but other people would say no, he was a revolutionary. So it's very subjective sometimes. And you have to determine what's a political crime to you and what's not. In more recent times, where this would be relevant would be Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. If you're not familiar with those names, stop now, go read about both, and decide for yourself whether they're criminals or traitors. Or whether they're traitors or heroes, because there's a line in there somewhere, and some people will fall on one side and some people fall on the other. So do yourself a favor and go read about both of those if you're not familiar with the crimes that they have been accused of. So political crime can be violent or nonviolent. May stem from religious or ideological sources, meaning they disagree with the government or they're unhappy with the way something has happened. Um, they may be they might believe in behaviors that are no longer acceptable in society, so they want to take things back to the way the world used to work. But most political criminals, even those who profit, consider themselves to be patriotic and altruistic, meaning they're doing something for the good of the country, for the greater good, and they are committing their crimes for a purpose that will fit their fit what they need, but also help the greater good. So we've kind of determined that there's four stages to becoming a political criminal. Observing something that's not right, a dissatisfaction. You see an event or a condition, whether it's economic, like poverty, or restrictions that the government is putting on society, meaning like lack of freedom or order. But they see something, they're like, that's not right. The second stage is it's not fair. The criminal concludes that the condition is just a product of injustice and it's not applying to people equally. Stage three, it's not your fault. Someone has to be held accountable for the unhappiness that the criminal is feeling. And then the last one is that you're evil. And the group that is cast as evil is then dehumanized and it becomes an appropriate target for revenge. And so when all four of these steps have happened, then you likely see a political crime come out of this transition that they've gone through. So types of political crimes, although it's not listed on here, one would be election fraud. So just illegal interference in an election. This should be something that you're familiar hearing about in the last few years. It can take form. It can really happen in multiple different ways, whether it's interruption, misinformation, registration fraud. But that is one type of political crime. Treason, this is by definition just an act of disloyalty against one's nation. Under common law, it was punished by death, and I believe it still can be. So if somebody was truly found guilty of treason, the government could sentence them to death. Espionage is a fancy word for spying. So if somebody is, committing espionage, it's just obtaining information about a government's organization or the practices in which they're participating in by, secret confidential information that's not really supposed to be released or public knowledge, but because they're spying, they've kind of come into this information, and again, illegally, I should say. State political crime. State political crime is when the state is trying to retain their power or make sure that the government is in charge, they might participate in state political crime. You'll see torture is one that's listed here. So torture would be, causing severe pain, suffering, physical or mental, inflicting just pain on someone, trying to obtain information. Waterboarding might fall underneath here. When you see ticking time bomb scenario, this is one of the times in which it could be a little bit of a gray area. Let's say that you had a strong belief that, a terrorist attack was about to happen, and you have somebody who is likely to know information about like where the bomb's at or what's going to happen. That's a ticking time bomb scenario. Is it allowable to use torture in that time to obtain the information so that lives are not lost? So, terrorism, the illegal use of force against innocent people to achieve a political objective. You've seen different types of terrorism throughout history, and what makes it terrorism is that political objective. That has to be there. They are trying to achieve something political by using the force, and the victims are the innocent people who are kind of caught in the middle. So go look at 9/11. The individuals who were in the World Trade Center had not done really anything to the terrorist, right? But the reason that they were there or involved is because the terrorists were trying to achieve that political objective, which was, revenge on the United States. So, terrorism and guerrilla. Guerrilla is just a term that means little war. So, this is like a small group of people who might be taking up a cause, not this large terrorist organization. Insurgents, they are individuals who might be receiving help from another country. So an insurgent might be, located in Pakistan, but be part of the Taliban. And they are insurgents because they are not necessarily located at the scene, but rather outside of it, and they're receiving some sort of support from another country. And then a revolutionary is just someone who has control of land, and they are changing the way. They're changing the landscape, and they are engaging in a civil war. So like when you talk about the American Revolution, those are revolutionaries. For this course, for this semester, I just want you to kind of understand the definition of terrorism, guerrilla, and insurgent. So some contemporary forms of terrorism. Political terrorism, you have right wing and left wing political groups. The right wing might be more like somebody might see that's like a neo-Nazi group, or let's see, your textbook gives the definition of the Aryan Nation, so or the Aryan Republic. Left wing would be the Earth Liberation Front or the Animal Liberation Front. Both are large groups that have political means or political objectives. Revolutionary terrorism, they are trying to exist replacing governments that hold a more acceptable political view to what they align with. When you talk about nationalist terrorists, these are groups that promote the interest of a minority or ethnic or religious group. They may feel persecuted, and so they are trying to better their political stance through terrorism. Lone act terrorism is just an individual who carries out a terrorist act. They don't necessarily have a participation in an organized group, but they may idolize a group, but they are acting alone. They may tie, like after their crime has been committed, they may pledge allegiance to something, but they're not really having the support of that group at the time that they're committing their crime. So what motivates terrorists? The psychological view is that it's really just destructive urges and just like their emotions that they're not coping with. They have problems with authority. It's not necessarily mental illness. There's not really a terrorist personality. They may have a history of child abuse and trauma, but it's more so just they are having destructive urges. Alienation view. This just means that they have a lack of opportunity and they feel alienated, so that they embrace terrorism, and that may find itself as part of like religious beliefs. The family conflict view. This would just mean that, let's say a male terrorist, for example, did not necessarily have the father figure, so he found a group and a leader to follow, and he becomes indoctrinated into their beliefs, and so he may follow through with what they're teaching because he was missing that father figure in his life. Political view. People are left out of the political processes, or you might have like a failed state, which is a nation that's government has just lost control of the territory or the place. They can't provide services to people. They're just failing on all fronts. So it might be that they're part of a failed state. Friendship, socialization. Essentially, they were looking for friendship. They made friends with the wrong people, and before they know it, they kind of become part of a group that is, a terrorist organization. Ideological. This just means like they have extreme beliefs and they have heightened perceptions of oppressive conditions. They believe that they're being victimized, and so they are trying to help by changing the government that is oppressive or not in agreement with what they believe in. The next couple of slides just talk about the criminal justice response to terrorism. So we have a director of national intelligence. Law enforcement is used, federal law enforcement. We have the Department of Homeland Security, state, county law enforcement, local law enforcement. These can all be part of the response to terrorism. Local law enforcement might not take the lead on these things, especially in a terrorist situation. It would be handed over to the feds, but they would still play an important role in responding to terrorism, not necessarily before, after the event, but also before the event, if there was information that there was a pending terrorist attack. U.S. Patriot Act. This was in response to 9/11, legislation that gave law enforcement agencies a freer hand to investigate and apprehend suspected terrorists. It expanded 4 traditional tools of surveillance, so wiretaps, search warrants, recording phone calls, pin trap orders, and subpoenas. It just makes the process, it expands those things and makes it easier to investigate possible terrorist activities that could be happening, or that are terrorists that are here in the United States or planning to attack the United States. Last slide for this would be the U.S. Freedom Act, which kind of replaced the Patriot Act in 2015, and it prevents national security, or the NSA, from continuing its mass cell phone data collection program. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this slideshow, I would like for you to take a couple minutes and research and read about Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. Also, Edward Snowden needs to be discussed here in this chapter as well. And if you could, please just make a few notes. And so whenever we get together this week on Microsoft Teams, we could come back and talk about those 3 individuals. Thank you.